Come join me on my second channel, Jaguar Gator 8, where we'll talk all things college football. New video drops every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch the latest video. And now, on with our feature presentation. Deja vu, a feeling of similarity, as if you've already experienced this. Deja vu, a feeling of similarity, as if you've already experienced this. There are some moments in everyday life that give you that feeling, and the same can be said about football, because there are quite a few games that feel almost identical to each other. Heck, I've talked about some of them on my channel before, as if you want to watch one of those videos to see what I mean, like how the Colts-Buccaneers game from 2003 and the Bills-Buccaneers game from 2021 were practically the exact same game, click the card in the upper right corner. Sometimes, deja vu can be a really cool thing, and sometimes, players love it, if they feel as though their great performance feels eerily similar to another great performance of theirs. But sometimes, it can be really bad. And man, was that the case here. The man you've been watching this whole time is Philadelphia Eagles return man Wally Henry. We'll get to how good he was in just a moment, but Henry holds the distinction of what might be the worst case of deja vu, not just in the near 90-year history of the Philadelphia Eagles franchise, but in the NFL as well. He got cut for doing something bad in the final game of the season against a division rival, then got brought back, and literally 1 year later, got cut on the final day of the season for doing the exact same thing in the exact same stadium against the exact same team. It's an absolutely insane case of deja vu that left a ton of Eagles fans feeling afterwards like they had already seen this story, knew how the script unfolded, and they didn't like it one bit. And this is the story behind the worst case of deja vu ever. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Wally Henry is, how important he was to the franchise, and what happened in the first game that led to the deja vu moment in the second game. In 1977, the Philadelphia Eagles signed the UCLA Speedster, in a move that made sense. The Eagles had Dick Vermeil as their head coach, and prior to becoming the head coach of the Eagles in 1976, he was at UCLA, so he knew Henry well and knew what he was capable of. And early on, Henry was having trouble establishing himself, as even though he was on the roster, the way in which he made the roster was bizarre. Henry was cut and brought back more times than there were seats at Veterans Stadium. As Henry said on that season, "I always got released on a Monday night, and Tuesday was our day off, and I was brought back on Wednesday. That was my first year." In other words, if you want to know what the original CJ Spiller on the Chiefs or Ben Koyak on the Jaguars was, where you had a player on and off the roster on a weekly basis, it was Wally Henry. Eventually, he wouldn't be a part of that carousel anymore, and used his speed to become the team's primary punt returner. And you could make the legitimate argument that Wally Henry was the most underrated punt returner in football. I think a lot of people would say that Rick Upchurch of the Denver Broncos was number one. But in terms of who was second best, my money's on Henry. He was explosive just about every time he touched the ball. As I'd say that in his prime, once every 3 times he touched it, you knew he was going to break it for a gain of at least 20. Kicking the ball to Henry in a non-fair catch situation was just asking for trouble. And even though every punter in football knew this, it was easier said than done. In 1978, Henry was averaging 15 yards per return before suffering a broken leg against the New Orleans Saints. But in 1979, Henry bounced back from that injury and played lights out. He made it to the Pro Bowl. He averaged 9.1 yards per punt return, which ranked 8th in the league. When it mattered most, and when the spotlight was on him, he shone, as in the playoffs, Henry had 8 punt returns and netted 99 yards out of them, averaging 12.4 yards per return. Teammates love the guy, with cornerback Bob Howard saying that when watching him, "I remember how quick he was. Extremely quick. I said, this guy's something special. We're never out of a game with him now. It's like having a home run hitter." And his coaches love the guy too, praising his aggressiveness, his demeanor, and the way he played the game. Assistant coach Lynn Stiles, who helped out on special teams, said on Henry, "If everybody had the same size heart pound for pound as he does, we would be invincible. He has ice water in his veins." Special teams are a huge part of football, and one of the reasons why the Eagles were so successful during the turn of the decade was because they had a great punt returner in Wally Henry, who could flip the field in the blink of an eye. But in 1981, it seemed like Henry's effectiveness as a return man was starting to diminish a bit. He averaged just 7.3 yards per punt return, which was the lowest average of his career by more than a full yard. In 1981, there were 25 players in football to have at least 20 punt returns. And of those 25 guys, Henry only ranked 21st. It was a far cry from his days as one of the top punt returners in football, and over the final 10 games of the season, he only averaged 6 yards per return, with just one game resulting in more than 7 yards per return. For really the first time in his career, Wally Henry was not a threat, and was not feared by opposing punters and coverage units. Still, his Eagles made the playoffs, and had a game in the wildcard round at home against their division rival, the New York Giants. It's December 27, 1981, and it's at Veterans Stadium. After winning the NFC last year for the first time ever, the Eagles' quest to go back-to-back as conference champions started with this game right here. As for how Henry performed in this one, yeah, it was not good. Henry said before the game that the Giants were no more physical than any other team. Not sure why you want to trash talk like that before the playoffs, but regardless, he was eating those words after this game. Because when Eagles fans point to a scapegoat from this game, which was a 27-21 loss that knocked them out and resulted in the first ever home playoff loss in the near half-century-long history of the franchise at that point, they will point to Wally Henry. On the opening drive of the game, the Giants get stopped, and are forced to punt it away. Dave Jennings gets off a boot, and Henry, despite having a giant defender charging at him, elects not to call for the fair catch, and tries fielding the punt low. This would be a big mistake. Henry muffed the punt. The Giants recovered and had all the momentum, as Scott Bruner capped off the drive with a 9-yard touchdown pass to Leon Bright to put New York up 6-0. But Henry's nightmare was just getting started. After the Giants took a 13-0 lead later in the quarter, thanks to Bruner's second touchdown pass of the day, with this one being a 10-yarder to John Missler, they had to kick it off back to the Eagles. They kick it to Henry. And Henry makes a mess of it, and that's putting it lightly. Henry completely muffs the kick, gets tackled, and the ball is recovered in the end zone by Mark Haynes for a touchdown. We were still in the first quarter, and the Giants were already up 20-0, with 13 of those points being directly off of a turnover by Henry. You can imagine how loud the Boo Birds were at the Vet, because Henry was directly costing them the game. Don't believe me? In the words of Bruno Mars, just watch.
20-0. 54 seconds left in the first quarter, and the Giants lead 20-0, and listen to the crowd. You did a good job, Mark Haynes, of not letting that ball get out of the end zone.
This game was ugly with a capital U, with Wally Henry, after a few years of being loved by the fanbase and being one of the most electric returners in the conference, now being the most hated man in the city of brotherly love. And it didn't help when after the game, Henry didn't really take the blame for his performance, but rather, he blamed outside factors, blaming the first fumble on the referees for not giving him enough room, and blaming punter Max Runiger for not calling out from the sidelines whether or not he should have caught it. And on the second, he said that Booker Russell should have fielded it, and blamed his fumble on Russell's indecision, saying, "We practice that all the time. I thought it was Booker's ball all the way." That's not going to win you too many fans, especially when you double down on it by continuing to call out your teammates and the fans for being clueless, saying, "Somebody has got to take the blame for this. I guess it will be me. Somebody was supposed to block those Giants coming down on me, but the people in the stands, they just think I screwed up." And one writer summed up Henry's performance and the reception he got in Philly afterwards perfectly, saying that the fans will remember Wally Henry as the clod who kicked loose the blade on the guillotine. It was one of the worst performances by any player on special teams in the history of the postseason. And that performance was so bad that combined with his awful 1981 season before this, Henry was cut before the start of the 1982 season. Henry knew it was coming after how poor he played in that playoff game, saying, "I know that really left a sour taste in everybody's mouth. We had gone so far, and then all of a sudden, we were behind 20-0 at halftime. Coach indicated to me that there was a very good chance I wouldn't be a Philadelphia Eagle this season." So that's the end of the story, right? Henry, after an abomination of a game, never wears the Eagle uniform again. Well, not quite. Because the Eagles eventually brought him back due to injuries, and decided that they were going to give him another chance to return kicks. And his big opportunity to do so? The final week of the regular season at home against none other than the New York Giants. But for this game, the second burst was the same as the first, because this was deja vu all over again. January 2nd, 1983. It's the final week of the abbreviated strike-shortened 1982 season, and we have another Giants-Eagles game at the Vet. The stakes for this one are significantly less than the stakes for the last meeting here. The Giants and Eagles both entered this game at 3-5, and while both teams had playoff hopes on the line, needing a win to make it, their odds were slim, as neither team controlled its own destiny, with each team needing 3 results to go their way besides this game. For all intents and purposes, barring a miracle, this game was meaningless. But for Wally Henry, this game was not meaningless at all. This game was a chance to prove himself to the world once again, including the exact same announcing team as the playoff game, with the legendary Pat Summerall and John Madden all the call. This was a chance to avenge what happened on this same field against this exact same team, and was a chance to do what he couldn't do the year before, with that being playing well against the Giants. As you could guess by the title of this video, however, that did not happen. In the second quarter, the Eagles were holding on to a 14-3 lead, and after Scott Bruner threw a touchdown pass to make it 14-10, the Giants were kicking it off back to the Eagles. Sure enough, they kicked it off to the deep man, Wally Henry. And on the return, sure enough, Henry fumbled. He was a bit too careless with the ball. It was punched out by Frank Marion, and Mike Dennis recovered it, giving the Giants great field position and eventually leading to a Giants score. It can't get any worse for Henry, right? Surely he can't fumble a second time against the Giants in the season finale at home, and duplicate the last game he had under these circumstances, right? Well, he does. Because after the Giants kick a field goal to make it 16-14, they kick it deep to Henry. And for Henry at this point, the ball is like a bar of soap or a stick of butter, because without anyone even touching him, it just slips out of his hands. Fortunately, unlike his other fumbles, the Eagles are able to recover, but they're starting pinned inside their own territory at the 5-yard line, with the Boo Birds once again making their thoughts known. At this point, if you were an Eagles fan and you weren't booing Henry, your fandom was being questioned. The Eagles lost this game 26-24, with the points coming directly off of a Henry turnover, once again being the difference in the scoring margin. For the second straight season, Henry fumbled twice in the season finale at home against the New York Giants in a loss that eliminated them from continuing to play on. At least this time, Henry took some responsibility for his failures, saying on the first one that he was trying to get a few extra yards and should have protected the ball better, and saying on the second one that he squeezed the ball too tight, and as a result, it came out like toothpaste. But the damage was done. No one wanted to hear words at this point, because everyone knew that for the second straight year, thanks to a poor performance against the Giants in the season finale, he fumbled his way out of a job, with Dick Vermeil saying on his play, "You can't do stuff like that against a team like the Giants and expect to win." Sure enough, shortly after this game, Henry was released, and this time, he would get no third chance. He was off the Eagles for good, and would never play another snap in the NFL. And it was all because of the New York Giants in season finales at the Vet. Despite the blunders, Henry had a great NFL career. When you're an undrafted free agent, and you play over half a decade in the league, make it to a Pro Bowl, play in the Super Bowl, which was the first one in franchise history, and finish as the all-time leader in franchise history in punt returns, you did something right. But for a lot of Eagles fans, they remember the last thing that he did, and remember his final impression. And that final impression was a guy that just forgot how to play at home against the Giants. Because for fans who wanted to forget what happened in the 1981 wildcard and didn't want to ever relive that moment, 1 year later, Wally Henry forced them to do just that in one of the worst deja vu moments ever. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.